Hi there, everyone. Today we're joined by Paul, and we're going to be talking
Hello.
about developing a client's retirement income strategy. So, Paul, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I am senior paraplanner at Weparaplan. I've been paraplanning for just over 5 years. Before that, I was in pensions administration. Again, I did that for about 5 years. So I've been in the industry for about 10 years now.
Lovely. So, what do you feel are the key considerations to take when developing a client's retirement income strategy?
So firstly, I'd probably look at the client's needs and objectives, how much income they actually need, whether they do need regular income or whether they just prefer to get lump sums and have cash in the bank. Obviously, that's very client specific. You don't want to sort of impart anything on them. You want them to take exactly what they want. You need to know what other income that they have. Obviously, if they've got state pension income, other pensions, do they actually need any extra income, or can they sort of work with what they've got? Whether they've got any other sort of means tested benefits that will be affected by income or things like that. Do they have an inheritance tax liability? For example, pensions are mainly outside the estate for inheritance tax purposes. So if they've got a liability, it makes sense to take an income from wrappers that are not within the estate, so that you can reduce the liability when that money's spent. It reduces the overall money in their estate. And then the other big one, I suppose, is the capacity for loss. If, for example, when they're taking an income, if there is a drop in the value of their funds, whether they can actually afford to have that loss. For example, when they are taking an income, in the initial years, if there is a large drop in the funds, it can take a long time for the pot to recover, if it ever can recover. When they're not taking an income, a fall can potentially be recovered over the years, but when they're taking the income, potentially it can't be recovered at all.
Okay, perfect. So what do you think is the best way to determine whether a retirement income would be sustainable?
Historically, there's been a thing called the 4% sustainable withdrawal rate, which basically,
I've heard of that.
if a policy has £100,000 in it, it's been deemed that £4,000, 4% is sustainable. Obviously, if you then take the £4,000 next year, there's potentially 96,000. If there's no growth, you then take 4,000 of that amount. That's been the historic way of determining that. Nowadays, a lot of advisors use cash flow analysis. So you can literally input all the different data of the client. You can add all their existing income. You can add assumed growth rates to determine whether that level of income will be sustainable based on a specific growth rate. So, for example, if there's going to be no growth, if it's going to grow by 1%, 2%, etc. So you can, again, put the client in a more informed position and have those discussions with.
What are your favourite cash flow forecasting tools to use?
I use cash calc mainly. That's the one that we use for a lot of our clients. I have used Voyant before. That's a lot more in depth. Cash calc's got a bit more user-friendly reports that the clients can it's got the graphs seem to be a lot more
prettier, don't they?
Exactly, yes. Yeah, it's a lot more, the client's got something that they can look at and they can sort of visualize it a bit more. Voyant's a bit more in detail. It's more sort of for the advisor's side, I would say. I suppose it's advisor firm specific how they want to do it and whether they actually want something to show the client or just to actually talk about it in their reports.
Yeah. So how can a client best utilise smooth funds?
Smooth funds, such as there's two main ones on the market, I would say. There's the Proof Fund, the Proof Fund range of funds with Prudential, and LV also have a smoothed range as well. So basically, their objective is to just sort of provide a steady rate of return, sort of upwards like that, rather than sort of reducing the volatility of the. Exactly, yes, yeah. So that's especially important when they're taking an income, like I said previously, that if there is a large fall, especially in the initial years, it's very hard to recover from that, whereas a smooth fund can hopefully provide a steady rate of return. And when they're taking an income, depending on the sort of the assumed growth rate, that income could potentially be offset by the expected returns from that smooth fund.
Okay, I see. So how can then stress testing help a client be in a more informed position?
It's about showing the extreme market conditions and whether their funds could actually sustain that. So, for example, If there was a market crash of, say, sort of 10, 15%, then you can show the effect of that. And if they're taking an income of a certain amount, whether their funds can sustain them for the rest of their life with that market fall and potentially no recovery from that fall. And again, it just puts the client in an informed position. They know what could potentially happen, and it's a discussion to have with the advisor about whether income should potentially be reduced or amended in some way to negate the effects of that potential market crash or that sort of stress testing simulation.
Would you, as a paraplanner, always conduct the stress test, or is it the advisor's responsibility?
I would say it's both. It's very client specific. I don't know the sort of right or wrong answer to it. If a client situation sort of dictates that it would be worthwhile doing the stress test on the cash flow, yes, absolutely. Again, just so the advisor can have that discussion with the client. Equally, some advisor firms like to do the cash flow analysis with the client on their iPad with them there and then. So yes, they will probably look to do that stress test. And it's just, it's very specific on the client's objectives and needs and circumstances, whether it's actually something that's worthwhile them seeing or not.
Yeah. Okay, that's all the questions I've got for you today, Paul. But thanks for joining me. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, bye.
Bye.